Psalm 30 and 5. For his anger endureth but for a moment, and his favor is life. And here's why I want you to pay attention. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Scripture as it is written is always our prayer. God bless us in the reading and the hearing of his most holy word. You may take your seat. I want to angle again in on this thought. As Howard Thurman said, I'm chasing an idea. I want to frame it with the words prophetic grief. Prophetic grief. Can you say that after me? Prophetic grief. In the immortal words we find in the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, it begins with this introduction: to everything there is a season. And then it lists the alternating moments and moves and moods of life. A time to love and a time to hate. A time to dance, a time to cease from dancing. A time to sow and a time to reap, a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to gain, a time to lose. A time for war and a time for peace. A time to be born, a time to die. And it even says a time to laugh and a time to cry. Inherent in the argument of the Jewish Kohelet, the wisdom teacher, was that life precedes this mortal life that we're all living. The hallmark of it is that it proceeds on alternating rhythm. Sunrise, sunset makes up the span of a day. The relentless ebb and flow of the tide of the sea and its tide as it washes up on the shore is ever shaping and reshaping the face of our earth. And the constant repetition of a man or woman's inhaling and exhaling sustains our lives until God himself swells his lungs and retrieves the very breath of life that first makes us living souls. Life moves forward on a cadence. There's a rhythm. It ain't all up. It's up and down. It ain't all good years. It's good and bad years. You got to take the good with the bad. It ain't all friends. It's friends and foes. It ain't all daybreak. It's sunset and sunrise. Life has rhythm and it has cadence. And even after you know the Lawad, L-A-W-D. Anybody know the Lawad today? And you super saved and sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost, hallelujah. And can quote 2-3 verses from Scripture. Life still moves on a cadence. I can't stand them people. I shouldn't say that. I'm in a pulpit. I'm slightly troubled by persons who want to act like they always up. You know, I don't claim depression. I don't claim cancer. You don't have to claim cancer. Cancer can't claim you. Then people are so happy all the time, pretend like they're happy all the time, as if somehow or another, because they met the Lawad, L-A-W-D, that they don't have no hard times and they no crying anymore. Well, the text defies people who want to pretend that good religion means that you get to navigate around the dark clouds of life. It rains on the just and the unjust alike. And in this fallen creation, this valley of tears, in this broken world in which we live, everybody has some crying days. And, you know, even in the love game, there's some crying days. Old Ray Charles said, well, it's crying time again. You're gonna leave me. I can see that faraway look that's in your eyes. I can tell by the way you hold me, darling, that there's gonna be another crying time. Yeah. Even you get kids, there's days they leap from your lap to your heart. There's some crying time. And you know, in this country, lately it seems like we keep ending up in the crying time. When 9 people are massacred on the inside of a church at a prayer meeting, welcoming a stranger who came to kill them because of who they are, not anything they've done. That's a crying time. It's a crying time when 26 kids are murdered in a classroom in Newtown, 5 and 6 years old, so small that the bullets literally ripped some of them bodies in half. A crying time. It was a crying time 20 some odd years ago when in Columbine, Colorado, a day of school turned into a killing field instead of a learning center. And 20 years later, we're in another school in Colorado. There was deja vu, and the same thing happened again. It's a crying time. It's a crying time at Fort Hood. It's a crying time at a mall. It was a crying time when Osama bin Laden and his 16 buddies with box cutters from Saudi Arabia turned commercial airliners into guided missiles and took down the World Trade Centers, and over 3,200 people lost their lives, and thousands more have been permanently sick of various diseases related to that whole experience. It's a crying time. It's a crying time when 12-year-old Tamar Rice was killed by police playing with a toy gun at a park. It's a crying time. It's a crying time when 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, who was just walking to the 7-Eleven, had some iced tea and some Skittles, and a grown man with a gun chased him and then shot his way out of a situation he caused. And then his pass, go collect $200 and get out of jail free card is, well, he was black and I was afraid of him. And then a jury full of people that none of them look like us said, that makes sense to me. That's a crying time. It was a crying time when Walter Scott, 50-year-old man, was shot 8 times in the back, and a policeman tried to act like he was going to plant evidence, didn't realize that he got busted on the cell phone. It was a crying time. It's a crying time when Eric Garner cried 11 times, "I can't breathe," to the cop who was choking him with an illegal outlaw chokehold, and the only crime going on was by the police. And yet, they entered exculpatory evidence. They said, well, they was afraid of him because he was big and black. Oh, I get it. In this country, being black is a precondition. That's a crying time. It's a crying time when John Crawford was in the Walmart trying to buy a BB gun for a nephew and got shot by the police for trying to buy a toy in the store, couldn't even get to the cash register. Because when his kind even buys toys, somebody feels threatened. In the store, where the toy is sold. That's a crying time. It seems like we keep visiting these crying times, and it makes you want to throw your hands up in the air. But if you remember nothing else about this sermon, remember this: you got to watch yourself in the crying time. Because if you don't collect yourself, the crying time is filled with such powerful emotions that you can hurt yourself or hurt somebody if you're not careful for yourself in the crying time. And so this morning I just want to talk about 3 different types of grief and get on out your way so you can go get to that big dinner as you eat the leftovers from yesterday's barbecue. That's got half y'all still sedated this morning. I want to talk about 3 types of grief that we experience in the crying time, and that is pathetic grief, sympathetic grief, and prophetic grief. Pathetic grief, sympathetic grief, and prophetic grief. First of all, I want to talk about pathetic grief. Pathetic grief is that reaction we have to the experience of loss, sorrow, tragedy, that causes us then to behave in ways that not only do not help the situation, but actually make it worse, and even bring your own character into question if at first you were the victim. Did you hear what I said? Pathetic grief is when we behave in a pathetic fashion for the sake of grief, behave in ways that do not change the fundamental injury, hurt, loss, but add to the woes and bring your own character into question because of how you behave, even if at first you were the victim. We saw instance of pathetic grief when in Baltimore, when we got a split screen, and where days of peaceful, organized marching that was bringing attention to this problem of policemen being out of control from sea to shining sea. And then all of a sudden, as some young people took to the streets and began burning police cars and looting stores and vandalizing and robbing, all of a sudden there was a picture within the picture, and it created a bifurcated conversation. Instead of the conversation being about police abuse, all of a sudden they started talking about inner city thugs. It shifted the conversation. It tilted the sympathies away from persons suffering from high-handed tyrannical police tactics all across this country to now talking about the policeman's right to defend themselves because of pathetic grief. Some of you all remember Dark Knight, the second in the trilogy of Batman movies. How many of you saw Dark Knight? How many of y'all didn't see it? What's wrong with you people? Y'all some culturally deprived saints. Y'all need to get out more and go to the movies. That's what's wrong with you. In Dark Knight, that's where the Joker was entered. A psychotic character. He robbed the mob of all their money, and because he didn't want the money, he just wanted to destroy things to be destroying it. And the Bruce Wayne / Batman was impressed with this new district attorney, Harvey Dent, an idealistic, smart young man who wanted to help put down the mob and catch the Joker. And all of a sudden, one night, Harvey Dent and his girlfriend, Rachel Dawes, who was Bruce Wayne's old girlfriend. But Bruce was cool about it. He was going to back off. He had his chance, but, you know, some dudes, if we can't have them, we don't want nobody else to have them. He wasn't that kind of dude. He's like, he had his chance. And so now she had hooked up with the district attorney, and all of a sudden they disappeared. The Joker's men had taken them hostage and put them in separate warehouses and then had rigged them with bombs. And then he staged his own arrest so that while he was under interrogation at the police station, which included a beatdown by Batman at the police station. Y'all seen the movie? And the Joker's laughing because he tells Batman that both the Attorney General and his fiance, which he don't know is Batman's former girlfriend, they're in separate warehouses and they're about to blow up. And they better get there. The trick was they only had enough time to save one of them. And they made the decision to save Harvey Dent, the young district attorney, because of his position as district attorney, because the female, she was just a girlfriend. It wasn't a gender thing. He was the district attorney and she was just... So they made the decision to be utilitarian, greatest good for the greatest number. So they saved him, and as the two warehouses went off, she died and he was saved, but it was close enough to where fire caught on his face, burnt half his face, and so he was in the hospital, and while he's grieving, the Joker comes and visits him. He does not know it was the Joker that had taken him hostage, and he's angry that they chose to let him live and his girlfriend die. He was a man of valor. He wanted it to be the other way around. And now he's in the hospital grieving because his girlfriend, his fiance, has died, and his face is normal on one side and is burned beyond repair on the other side. That becomes the genesis of his villainous character that would be called Two-Faced. Because he's normal on one side, he's permanently effaced and scarred on the other side. And the Joker tells him, you ought to get revenge. He hears that, he internalized that. When he gets out of the hospital, he becomes a sick, two-faced, serial killer whose MO was to take a coin after he had abducted people who were at his mercy. He'd flip a coin. Heads, if I let you go free. Tails, if I kill you. Only problem, it was a two-sided coin. Or it had the same thing. It was a trick coin. Two tails on both sides. So, oops, sorry, not your day. And so here was a guy who used to be an idealistic, smart, justice-driven district attorney, and now he's a two-faced serial killer, because he allowed his grief to get the best of him. My brothers and sisters, you need to watch yourself when sorrows like sea billows roll, because I don't care how saved, how sanctified, how Holy Ghost filled you are, how much you love Jesus, when we, in those seasons of distress and grief, if you allow yourself to become driven by the desire to feed off like a cow chewing its cud, to feed off of those toxic emotions that come up from the loathsome and the base places in your spirit, all of us can become a two-faced killer. Oh, you may not ever take anybody's physical life. You just may murder their self-esteem. You might be the person who on Sunday morning is giving praise to God, but after the benediction and before the next week's invocation, you are constantly slamming people with your sledgehammer words, with your forked tongue. One insult at a time, one sarcastic statement at a time, one put down at a time, one ridiculing word at a time for the children or the spouse, the significant other, or the colleagues that happen to be unfortunate enough to be in your wake of destruction because you ain't never got over it. Just a two-faced killer of other people's joy. That's pathetic grief. Pathetic grief is what happened in New York City after the Eric Garner deaths, when somebody in that city decided that they was going to ambush police officers Wei-Jin Liu and Rafael Ramos, and it shifted the conversation to talking about police brutality to all of a sudden talking about random killers and police's right to go home. It didn't help. It's understandable, but it doesn't help. You need to watch yourself when you're about to lose your mind up in here, up in here. Pathetic grief, pathetic grief. But not only is there pathetic grief, there's sympathetic grief. Sympathetic grief. Sympathetic grief is practiced by those persons who, after death or loss or tragedy, they think that their duty is simply to feel sorry for you. Yeah, they feel sorry for you. Let me give you a window of application. Those of you who've been to funerals around here have heard me tell the story sometimes about a little girl who, she asked her mama could she go ride her bike with her friend, and her mama said yes, but you better be back here for the street lights come on. Anybody remember that? You had to be home for the street lights come on? Well, it was before the cell phone. Wasn't no calling me, telling me where you at. You better have you behind in this house for the street lights come on. That was back in the days when parents were still in control. Yeah. I can tell some of y'all ain't in control because you be asking kids questions where our parents used to make statements. Kids be running around on the chairs that are made for people to sit on, not to run on. They run around on chairs, and you saying, honey, do you think you want to sit down? Do you think it don't matter what they want to do? Our parents used to go, now do it again. Anybody remember that pop you could hear ringing through the church? That was the Lord's work right there. That was the Lord's work. That was soul saving. Yes, it was. Yeah, that was a life lesson that you remember the rest of your life. All she had to do after that was go. We go on to something else because we learned that. Now y'all asking kids if they want to stop running and asking them if they want to go to bed. And one day they're going to ask you if you want to leave your own house. But that's a whole nother sermon. And this little girl asked if she could go, and her mama said, you'll be back when the street lights come on, and don't be giving me no what happened was if you come in here afterwards. And the street lights came on. Sure enough, the girl was nowhere to be found, and her mama was pacing the floor worried about her. She was worried, and and she had the belt in one hand, and she was pacing and so forth because she was praying she was okay, and if she was okay, she was going to kill her. And the girl finally showed up, and as her mama raised her hand to begin exacting justice, the little girl said, well, Mama, hold on, what happened was, and she said, a man backed up his car and ran over my friend's bike. And I had to stay and help her. And Mama said, you don't know about fixing no bike. She said, I know I don't know how to fix no bike, but I had to stay with her and help her cry. And I tell that story at funerals oftentimes to thank the people who came to the funeral to be with the family, practicing what we call the ministry of presence. Because sometimes you can't fix the situation with somebody, but you just be there present with them to show that you care, and that has value. That has value. But my brothers and my sisters, don't confuse ministry of presence with empty, hollow sympathy. Because people need more in this life than somebody to come along and help them cry. They didn't cry by themselves. Have I got a witness? See, this is what Governor Nikki Haley needs to understand, who is not deserving, in my opinion, of any pats on the back for calling for the removal of a flag that a year ago she was defending it, as she capitulated to her South Carolina constituents that she knows has racist proclivities and underpinnings in their thinking. So when she wanted their votes and she didn't want to rattle her base, she defended the flag. But now, since the political winds have shifted, she's against it out of cold-blooded, calculated political expedience, no moral compass and no moral outrage. And when she called for the removal of the flag, but did not use her gubernatorial powers to draw the flag down bring it down right now so that she could have it cleaned and just take a little while longer than you might think. And so when Reverend Pinckney, one of the 9 people killed in Charleston, was laid in state, he had to lay in state underneath the Confederate flag because a spineless, capitulating governor thought it was enough just to call for the removal of the flag. They want to come by and help us cry. But then when it's time to take down shameful, shameless symbols of a demonic past, she doesn't want to do that. We don't want to go after the systemic causes of many of the things that's snatching tears from people's eyes. There are people who want to lay flowers at the tombs of the babies in Newtown, but when it came time to talk about new gun laws, all they wanted to do is come help you cry. But they didn't want to make it so that you can't fire off 33 rounds before you have to reload anymore, or that if you're mentally ill, you can't get one of them guns in the first place. They don't want to do the heavy lifting and deal with the systemic issues. And that's sympathetic guilt. It's sympathetic grief, as Dr. McNeil talked about on Thursday. There are people, they'll hit like on Facebook and they think that they've done their duty. They'll lay flowers at a roadside memorial for somebody got hit by a drunk driver, or somebody got gunned down by the police. But now when it's time to talk about real reforms and new laws and new legislation, all of a sudden they start asking a different set of questions. And that's sympathetic grief. People who think that all that is required of them is to come along and help you cry. Listen, the 46 million Americans in this country that are hungry, go to bed hungry every night, they don't need you to come help them cry. They need you to help pass laws and support programs that offer poor kids lunch and breakfast in the summertime when school is out. The same Governor Haley that called for the removal of the flag, when she was asked, was she now willing to sign up her state to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Health Care Act so that the 800,000 South Carolinians that do not have coverage right now can get coverage. People who are sick and even some dying from quite treatable diseases. All of a sudden she was reticent because she doesn't want to support the president's Affordable Health Care Act. When it comes time to go from empty, hollow gestures to actually systemic changes, she doesn't want to accept the $8 billion that she has rejected, $8 billion that can make sick people well. Those 800,000 people don't need a governor to help them cry. They need a governor to sign the legislation to expand Medicaid so they can go see a doctor. That's sympathetic grief. Sympathetic grief. People who think the only thing it requires of them is to lay a few flowers, to come to the funeral to help you cry, but don't want to do anything to make anything any different. I heard a song that said, if I can help somebody as I travel on, if I can cheer somebody with a word of song, if I can show somebody they're traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. Well, pathetic grief and sympathetic grief is not what the psalmist is talking about when it says grief endures for a night, but joy comes in the morning. The metaphorical night of grief, the long dark night of the soul, one said, how does it turn to another daybreak where joy bells are ringing? Again, it's because it happens when people practice what I like to call prophetic grief. Prophetic grief is when it does two things. Prophetic grief, first of all, says, I will not allow myself to be overcome with negative emotions because of the loss, the death, or the tragedy. It says, I will not allow myself to become overcome with negative and toxic emotions. That's what the scripture was talking about when it said, recompense no man evil for evil, overcome evil with good. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Turn the other cheek. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hate you. Do good to those who despitefully use you. Prophetic grief says, I will not allow myself to be controlled by negative emotions. You see, that's really the lesson of Charleston. When a man who was welcomed into the church, though he came to kill them, his hosts who the unsuspecting victims to be welcomed him in. And then the families, all 9 families, one by one, showed up at the courthouse, as Dr. McNeil called it, the Wednesday night crowd, the prayer meeting crowd. Not the fickle, come if ain't nothing going on Sunday morning fluff. No, I'm talking about the real prayer warriors, the prayer intercessors, the folks who's praying, the few who's praying for the many. When the many's out there playing in the sunlight, the few are down here on their knees, who run on their knees, who know something about calling on God till you get an answer. That crowd showed up at the courthouse. One by one looked at Killer in the eye and said, we forgive you. And folk thought they had lost their mind. This man killed your loved one. Yes, we forgive him. You're going to let him off the hook? It's not about letting him off the hook. It's about letting him know that he does not determine how we feel. He was filled with enough hate to pull a trigger, but he will not make us hate. We chose love a long time ago, and I turned the other cheek. I'm still going to walk in love. I was talking to my friend Joyce Taylor, Como News anchor, about this thing on the phone the other day before we taped that interview, and she said, you know, forgiveness is not about letting somebody off the hook. She said, forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the inside out. Whoa, I said, Joyce, you don't usually get deep on me like that. Can I say that from the pulpit? I'll give you credit. Yes, forgiveness is not letting someone else off the hook. It's you getting unhooked from the painful past. So you ain't stuck in yesterday trying to find tomorrow, but you can't find tomorrow's joy because you're tethered to yesterday's sorrow. Forgiveness is your right to declare your declaration of independence from yesterday's sorrow, to be free from the inside out. That's how you bless those who curse you. Because you got cursing in you, I got blessing in me. That's why you love your enemies, because my enemies are driven by hate, but I'm driven by love. That's why I do good to those who despitefully use you, because I got goodness in me despite the way that you've treated me. Prophetic grief says, in the face of grief and sorrow, that I will not allow the people who caused my grief. I will not allow the people who broke my heart. I will not allow the people who made me victims of unmerited suffering. I will not allow you to determine my mood, my values, my mindset. No. That's the first thing that prophetic grief does. It chooses values that live in spite of. See, this joy I have it in spite of you. I have it regardless of what has gone on. I have it in the face of. Anybody in here got that in spite of, regardless of, in face of joy? The joy you have, this whole world didn't give to you, and it can't take it away. That's all they said when we forgive you. The joy that I have, not even a murderer's bullet can take it away. That's the first thing that prophetic grief does. It says, I will not allow negative emotions to consume me or control me. And once
once that has happened, then prophetic grief also says, and here's the part you need to catch. It also says, I will no longer accept the status quo. Sometimes we think forgiveness means accepting the status quo. No, 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 no. Even Miss Seeley understood. She had to forgive Mr., but she still put that knife to his throat. She said, I'm no longer accepting. Come on, somebody. See, Al Green's first wife forgave him, but she still cooked him grits. Oh, come on. Ain't nothing like a grit testimony. You talking about behavior modification. That man was in the shower saying, Lord, if you get these grits off me, I promise him that I will serve him till I die. Prophetic grief says, I will not be overcome with negative, controlled by negative emotions, but I will not accept the status quo. What you talking about, preacher? August 28th, 1955. 12-year-old Emmett Till on vacation from Chicago, visiting his relatives down in the South. Didn't know the mores of the South. Supposedly, they say, he whistled at a white woman. This was in the days when they said when a white woman cried, a black man died. It's down in the dirty South. It was dirty then, it's dirty now. Not the deep South, the dirty South. And he didn't understand the mores of the South, where if a white woman was coming down the street and a black man was walking down the street, black man or boy, he was supposed to know to turn his eye gaze down and away. And being from the North, he didn't understand Southern mores. He didn't understand the culture of the dirty South. And so apparently he didn't turn his eye gaze down or away. They said he whistled at her, but the whistling of a 12-year-old boy should not have been a problem for a grown behind woman of any race. But nonetheless, with the viciousness and the violence of the willful tyranny against black people by the dirty South, later on that night, that boy was snatched from his bed in his uncle's house by a mob of sheet-wearing Christians. And his body was found several days later, washed up in the Tallahassee River. His head had been split open with an axe. His right eye had been pulled out. His throat had been slashed and his tongue pulled out like a necktie, like the drug lords do when they give you a Colombian necktie. His genitals had been cut off and shoved into his mouth. Most of his bones had been broken. His jaw had been almost ripped off. And then he was wrapped in barbed wire, and with a weighted hook, he was thrown into the Tallahassee River to drown by these Christians. And his mother, in her grief and sorrow, decided that she wasn't going to have no closed casket funeral. No, she wanted the whole world to see the reality of the South that tried to pass itself off as the charming Christian South. No, it was the vicious, hateful, violent, demonic, dirty South. And she wanted everybody to see the tyranny that black folks had been living under for hundreds of years. And she stood by her son's casket, and one would-be mourner after another came by. Many vomited. Others couldn't even stand to look and turned away as they saw the reality of the violence that had long been denied. And now a 12-year-old boy mutilated. They didn't have cell phones then to catch him. Her mother put his body on display. Well, as it would turn out, 4 months later, when a 42-year-old seamstress got done with a hard day's work and got on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and a white man came along and wanted her to give up her seat because all the other seats were filled. And according to the mores of the dirty South down there in Montgomery, Alabama, this woman was supposed to get up and give that white man her seat. And she said immediately, Rosa Parks said immediately she started thinking about Emmett Till. It's amazing how some things that people mean for evil, God means for good. He didn't cause it, but God can bring redemption into any situation. And she said the memory of Emmett Till that happened only 4 months earlier was percolating in her soul. And she could not accept the status quo of black folks having to take a back seat to other folks just because they black any longer. She decided that day, not that her feet was tired, but that her soul was tired. Enough was enough. And when she sat down on that seat and they drug her off that bus, it was like the match that hit gasoline on the floor. 50,000 black folks stood up and marched together for 381 days. And when you get 50,000 black folk to do anything together for 381 days, you know that God is in the mix. And that was the beginning of them taking righteous indignation, channeled into a creative force, and became a sledgehammer to take down the walls of old Jim Crow by people who had finally resolved that I've had enough pain. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I don't need you to help me cry. I need you to help me march. I need you to help me fight. I need you to help me organize, because from now going forward, we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. That's prophetic grief. When it stands up and no longer accepts the status quo, my brothers and my sisters. And that is where we are today in our country. So we are so far past the time for us to sit here and accept things just the way that they are. It's time for us as a country. How many children have to die in this country before we realize that we need to change in our gun laws and even reconsider the relevance of the Second Amendment in the 21st century world? How many people who have to die before, as the song says, we realize too many have already died? How long will it take for us, to young people, you're talking about shifting, and shift happens. There's a shifting in the electorate of this country. There's a demographic shifting. We will no longer have a racial majority by 2030 in this country, and people are trying to prepare themselves to have disproportionate power to their numbers so that even though they're no longer a majority, they can still control the decision-making apparatus in this country. If they can't beat them, they're going to cheat them. So they have gutted the federal oversight power, Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, permanently gerrymandered districts so that they'll stay permanently white, and closed down polling stations in black communities on campuses to make it harder for women, young people, and minorities. And while y'all out turning up on a Saturday night, how many of you are turning out to vote, even if you got to stay your black behind there all night long, all night long, all night long? If you party all night long, will you support your political party all night long? So that we not only have the restoration of Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, we need a new map, not only to include the 12 former states of the Confederacy, but throw in Ohio, throw in Pennsylvania, throw in all the states that have come behind the gutting so that they can try and fix this nation on a resegregated course. We need no sympathy. We need soldiers. As I've told you before, history changes when young people get serious about serious things. Why they change? It breaks my heart. Who was part of a generation where the artists led the fight for consciousness, conscious-raising musicians. Marvin Gaye, who gave us Let's Get It On, but he also gave us What's Going On. Talked about ecology, poverty in the inner city blues, the war movement. Harold Melvin in the Blue Note, who said, wake up everybody, no more sleeping in bed, no more backward thinking, time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from what it used to be. There's so much hatred, war, and poverty. Wake up all the teachers trying to build a new land. I know we can do it if we all lend a hand. The only thing we have to do is put it in our mind. Surely things will work out. They'll work out all the time. Wake up all the doctors. Make these old people well. They're the ones who suffer, who catch all the hail. They don't have so very long before their judgment day. Won't we make them happy before they pass away? Wake up all the teachers, time to teach a new way. Maybe then the kids will listen to what we have to say. They're the ones who are coming up. The world is in their hands. So won't you teach the children, teach them the very best you can. The world ain't gonna get no better. No, no, no. If we just let it be, the world ain't gonna get no better. We gotta change this world, just you and me. And now we got young millennial artists arguing about their right to take the word that used to be flung at us to make us think we weren't nothing, and fight for their right to call ourselves the word that we used to wish others would stop calling us. Now, we need a shift in here when we're fighting for the right to call ourselves the word that other people used to call us to make us look like nothing. We need a shift when we're fighting for the right to call ourselves the word that others used to call us to make us think oh yeah, shift has happened. There's some shift happening. We need a redemptive shift. Come on, somebody. We need a redemptive shift. As a man thinketh, so they are. Prophetic grief says, I no longer accept the status quo. Prophetic grief says, we're going to turn this thing upside down till we turn it right side up. Prophetic grief says, you can't quiet me. You can't scare me. You can't run me away. And if I perish, then let me perish. But I'm going to see the King. That's prophetic grief. Prophetic grief is when you realize that you can't do better till you know better. Young people, what you're reading, I can tell what your mindset is by the apps you got on your phone. Huh? You got the Wall Street Journal on your phone. You got U.S. News and World Report on your phone. Huh? You got CNN on your phone. You got The Nation, you got The Atlantic, you got Sojourners, you got Christian Century, where you can get some progressive theological reflection on your phone. What you got on your phone? Hollywood Wives, what you got on your phone? What kind of garbage you got on your phone? We are being mesmerized by garbage while power is being redistributed before our very eyes. The nation is shifting. Money is flowing up. The rich are getting richer. The poor are getting poorer. District lines are being redrawn. And y'all staring into your phone like you've been hypnotized. Like it's your digital crack. The world changes when young people get serious about serious things while they're still young because they're mad enough. It's one thing for you to go to a funeral of another one of your homeboys that got killed by the police or by the drive-by shooting of another confused brother just like you. It's another thing for you to realize that brothers don't have enough education, brothers don't have enough jobs, brothers are not employable, and for you to realize we got to change the whole arrangement. So the question for us today is, in this crying time, are we practicing pathetic grief? We just acting out, making things worse? Not only are the dead, but now folk wondering if those of us who are still alive are crazy because folk are burning, looting, cursing, acting crazy. Are you practicing sympathetic grief? You good for the funeral. You good for a few inauthentic pieces of African art. You good for getting out your kente cloth made in Taiwan. But other than that, you cruising. Your money ain't going to no cars. Your time is not reliably committed to no intervention, no after-school program, no progressive political intervention. James Russell Lowell once said, I say this, I get out your way, he said, it is required of every citizen in a free democratic society to read and think. To read and think. He said, but if that thinking does not translate into a definitive opinion, and if that opinion does not lead to considerate action, then they are nothing. He said, it is required, it is the duty of every citizen in a free democratic society to read and think. You got to read. Reading is fundamental for thinking people. Garbage in, garbage out, reading. Not mystery novels, reading. What's going on in your world? Reading. Do you even know what I'm talking about when I talk about Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act? When I talk about the Second Amendment, have you ever read it to see this is the shortest of all of the 10 inclusions in the Bill of Rights? Reading. It is required they read and then think, critically think, and not use Jesus as your excuse for being an idiot and uninformed. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You should know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, and you'll never know the truth about the facile forces of state and culture, the maniacal forces that are manipulating your life, your economically, politically, socially, subliminal interjections in media. Reading and think, and that thinking should translate into a definitive opinion. Do you have a thought on the subject? Have you thought about the subject? And then if that opinion does not translate, lead into considerate action, what are we going to do now to make this world a better place? Then those people are nothing. I thank God a previous generation read, thought, formed an opinion, and took to the streets to open the doors that we've walked through. So why are so many of us sitting down now doing nothing but consuming, lulled to sleep on our private promised lands, thinking that the battle was over when you could afford to get your hair done every week? It's crying time. It's crying time. But are you practicing pathetic grief? Are you practicing empty, hollow, sympathetic grief? Or the kind of prophetic grief is changing laws, bringing justice, bringing fairness? Every head bowed.